This is the World Organic News for the week ending 6th of May 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Episode 167. Time for a revolution run by gardeners. I came across a quote somewhere in my travels lately that I just can't get out of my mind. I suspect it was from Charles Massey of Call of the Reed Warbler fame, link in the show notes. The words went something like this. Sustainability isn't enough anymore, we need to regenerate. Now this immediately put me in mind of a Bill Mollison quote. Quote, the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack and who produce words and bullets, not food and shelter. End quote. And clearly we're in a position where we need a revolution, not the violent sort, but a broad-based grassroots revolution in food production. We face the current effort in Star Wars terms of the Empire striking back, with the EPA and the US confirming glyphosate as safe to use. From the Reuters report, the US Environment Agency says glyphosate weed killer is not a carcinogen. Quote, May 1, Chicago, Reuters. The US Environmental Protection Agency said on Tuesday that glyphosate, a chemical in many popular weed killers, is not a carcinogen, contradicting decisions by US juries that found it caused cancer in people. End quote. Now the science this is based upon was provided by Monsanto, so no problem there really. The science, as it is very old in this IT world. Since the original approval of glyphosate, some newer research has occurred. The argument from Monsanto is based upon the notion that glyphosate attacks plants through the Shikimate pathway, which is peculiar to plants but does not exist in animals. Ergo, glyphosate is safe to use around animals. Ta-da! As I've explored on this podcast and elsewhere, there's a plethora of other beasties lurking on and within us. Literally within us. From the journal Nature, the Human Microbiome Project. Quote, before the Human Genome Project was completed, some researchers predicted that approximately 100,000 genes would be found. So many were surprised and perhaps humbled by the announcement that the human genome contains only 20,000 or thereabouts protein-encoding genes. Not much different from the fruit fly genome. However, if the view of what constitutes a human is extended, then it is clear that 100,000 genes is probably an underestimate. The microorganisms that live inside and on humans, known as microbiota, are estimated to outnumber human somatic and germ cells by a factor of 10. Together, the genomes of these microbial symbionts, collectively defined as the microbiome, provide traits that humans did not have to evolve on their own. End quote. The paper goes on to explain that there is a connection between these beasties and our own immune systems. Now this is the clincher. There is a growing body of evidence that glyphosate does affect the microbiome. I quoted a paper out of the University of Texas Austin a while back on the effects of glyphosate on the ability of bees to withstand infections. Now the legal actions currently running and subject to appeal refer to individuals suffering non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Given our growing knowledge of the microbiome, our immune systems, and the consequences of glyphosate exposure, I would not be surprised if more diseases were able to be related to that glyphosate exposure. The point I'm trying to get to is the inertia in the system. The courts have decided in the favour of individuals bringing prosecutions against glyphosate manufacturers, and this is quite remarkable, but a sign of things changing. Then the EPA decides to reaffirm the safety of glyphosate, and that's a sign of that inertia. Good science takes time, and science will self-correct its own errors eventually. But it did take from 1912 until 1953 to overthrow the Piltdown hoax. Link in the show notes. Whilst Piltdown was a matter of clownish attempts to show that the first human was English, even if that England was 500,000 years ago, other matters need to be cleaned up more quickly. The glyphosate situation is one such. And glyphosate is but the tip of the iceberg of industrial agriculture, the canary in the coal mine. I'm running out of metaphors. The point is, glyphosate is part of a suite of activities which destroy soil life, requiring the application of greenhouse gas-intensive fertilisers, which destroys even more soil life and requires even more fertiliser, and, well, you get the picture. The vast store of soil life, read fertility, which is accumulated through physical, chemical and biological actions, is being slowly bled dry. From a Guardian article back in 2017 entitled, UK is 30 to 40 years away from eradication of soil fertility, warns Gove. Quote, the UK is 30 to 40 years from the fundamental eradication of soil fertility in parts of the country, the Environment Secretary Michael Gove has warned. We have encouraged a type of farming which has damaged the earth, Gove told the parliamentary launch of the Sustainable Soils Alliance. Countries can withstand coup d'etat, war and conflict, even leaving the EU, but no country can withstand the loss of its soil and fertility, end quote. To overcome this soil-destroying culture, we need a root and branch, grassroots, overgrow the system approach to rolling back industrial agriculture. Whilst we on the front line, custodians of land, can make a difference, we need to change the incentives within the current system. If the true costs of production were included in the sale price of goods, we would see a fairly quick realignment from the incentives implied in such a pricing structure. To do this, though, requires tearing down the lobbying structures inherent in the democracies of the world. In a more command and control political system, change relies upon the mindset of the supreme leader, or whatever title they use. Now, as to how we destroy the lobbying industry, I have no idea and very little hope. Maybe we need to infiltrate and subvert it, but I don't know how to do that either. Hammering our local politicians, complaining loudly until they are forced to change might work. I really am at a loss. And that's where I see the EPA coming out in support of glyphosate when the growing evidence says otherwise. And on that frustrating note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. If you're interested in starting a podcast, there's podcast checklists available over at John Moore Podcasting Services. Otherwise, I'll be back next week, and thanks for listening.